Good morning. Good to see everybody. And thanks for your intro there. I was kind of thinking similarly too that this whole process has been pretty tumultuous, I think, for a lot of different people. A lot of different feelings can come up as a result of this type of thing. Could be the whole range of things, sadness or kind of discouragement. Of course, it depends on what political perspective you're coming from, but I think there's a lot of feeling that things are agitated in different ways. So I thought I'd just address that to the degree that might still be on your mind here about a week after. And just wanted to kind of mention that the teachings really can give us guidance in these areas in a lot of ways. And I thought I'd mention, in terms of like the feelings that can come up, the different things that I mentioned there, the practice is, or the teachings really, I think, guide our attention back to really taking care of what's going on in our life in its immediacy. So, like I say, the different types of ways that we're feeling about what's going on, maybe there's a bit of an impetus to want to try to get rid of those, but the practice is really, I think, helping us come back and really take care of what's going on in our life, to really tend to our life. And I think if we miss this instruction in some ways, then there's such a common tendency to basically ignore how we'll end up automatically wanting to control things, or how automatic our aversion is to like the feelings that come up. But by paying attention, we can actually see that leaning of a mind as it's happening. So the teachings are helping us to see that this is not about trying to get rid of undesirable feelings or emotions. It's actually to pay attention to what's going on in our life and notice how we actually kind of want to control things in different ways. Try to get rid of something that's undesirable. And so with this type of practice, I think we can just see more clearly what's going on, see how, a lot of these things that sort of just don't occur to us when we're not closely paying attention. And as Andrew was saying, I think community can be a great aspect to feel the support of other people, the practice that we're engaging in. When you come in and sit meditation, you don't have to say a single word. I mean, you can tell that other people feel that this is important. Other people who are listening to a talk or studying this way, we feel that this gentle practice is, there's something to it. And I think there's an encouraging aspect to being together. And that can be both here in the room and people on Zoom, everybody supporting each other's practice in different ways. So just want to give appreciation to everybody who's here and the different things that we do together to really dedicate ourselves to really taking care of our life, no matter what comes up. Actually, this story that I'll be talking about today, I think has some overlap to regarding some of these things that I've been speaking of here at the intro. It's a story of challenge and resilience. And obviously, those are topics that come up in human society perennially. So it's a story of a Zen nun, and the book is Eminent Nuns. It's a collection of different stories and teachings of 17th century Chinese nuns. And the one I'll be talking about today, I should mention the author is Beata Grant. The story I'll be talking about today is a nun named Jizong Jing She. So that's Jizongxingche. And this is this particular story in her life, as we see in the biography, is showing a person who's actually coming from somewhat of a eminent scholar family, kind of an official family. So that's what her upbringing is. And she was born in 1606. And luckily, we have writings and accounts of the lives of these nuns. And of course, we'll be bringing in both teachings and the biography of this particular practitioner who lived in the Hunan province. So that's southwest China in the 17th century. So I thought I'd just start out by reading a quick quote from her recollection of kind of a younger period in her life when she realized that she was drawn to exploring kind of a spiritual path. She says, when I became a little bit older, so she was still young at this point, but she said she took pleasure in reading Confucian texts and Buddhist sutras and felt concern for the dust and confusion of the world. And she thought deeply about matters of life and death. Or she says, I thought deeply about matters of life and death and begged my father to let me sacrifice myself and enter the religious life, but he refused. Later, I was engaged to a man named Chen, but after only a few years, he perished on his way to take up a government post. And this is in the time of great turmoil. The Ming Dynasty is collapsing due to outside forces. So there's great conflict going on. The author says that they don't know exactly how the husband perished here, but it very well could have been because of the conflict that was going on at the time. And there's somewhat of a similarity in a lot of these different stories of the nuns in this book. As the author points out, you see early piety or drawn to spiritual, quest, basically. And then often an unsuccessful attempt to avoid marriage, and then often widowhood as well. And we see in this case that the untimely death of the husband actually changes the path of this particular person, and in some ways opens up opportunity to practice. Her first move, as the book here says, was not to take tonsure and enter a convent. Rather, she simply took up residence in a small hermitage where she could devote herself to religious practices in the time she had free from her domestic duties, including caring for her in-laws and children. So she would spend any extra time devoting herself to this path. She writes, I then built a hermitage in which I installed a Buddha image and began to engage in the cultivation of practice. At dawn and dusk, I would take time from my other duties to sit in quiet meditation. I took such delight in adhering to the precepts and religious discipline that I became determined to leave the householder's life. In the days that followed, began to seek out teachers of knowledge and wisdom. And she was in a particular area where there were teachers around. And one of the first teachers she came across, and it's unknown whether this is a man or a woman, but Master, if I can get the pronunciation right. Lost my place in the notes here. Master Haitian. So this person was able to guide Jizong a bit. She actually gave a copy, or she received a copy of transmission stories that was recently compiled by another teacher that was in the area. That teacher's name was Shanxi Tongji, so Tongi. So the story, as it unfolds, you can see that there's clearly societal aspects going on for a woman trying to begin practice. So, of course, at this time, very hard for a person to extract themselves from societal structures, and also obviously things that we see in our society even today in different ways, obviously. But Jizong, this nun, seeks out this author of the transmission stories, this teacher Tong Ji, and begins to study with him. And a lot of, as the author mentions here, pious women who are lay people would often just recite sutras and so forth, and chants and things of that sort. But Jizong was seeking deeper reflection in her studies. And here's an interaction between Jizong and this new teacher that she has found. She said, the teacher asked me, "What spiritual achievement have you attained at home?" "I've engaged in Buddha recitation," I replied. "Has Buddha recitation got you anywhere?" he asked. "I have come to you precisely in order to seek your guidance," I answered, bowing respectfully. Then he said, "You should investigate the following. When not a single breath arises, where will you settle yourself?" So there's an interesting interaction there where somebody's coming in, they're becoming more interested in understanding this way. And I think the teacher is maybe gauging a little bit what the interest level is, what the aspiration exactly is of this new practitioner, with somewhat of an enigmatic question there, which I think would help the teacher understand, what level of determination does this person have? Is it, are they looking at really answering some deeper questions here? So I won't go too much into that particular exchange there, but it's just an interesting one where she's saying that she wants to go deeper in her practice. The book then talks a little bit about the interactions between the teacher and Jizong, and as both recognize, and as the author points out, it sounds like Jizong had a bit of an intellectual leaning in her approach to teachings. And some instruction was given back in terms of that. I thought it was kind of interesting here. So the instruction is, if you wish to understand the great matter of life and be a good vessel of the Dharma teachings, you must first cut off all empty words and apply yourself to your practice with integrity, never deviating for a moment. Enlightenment is like the flip of a palm, after which no one will be able to cheat and mislead you. But if you have if all you have is a wide and extensive memory, your words will be nothing more than chatter with which you deceive both others and yourself. Which I think is probably a good message for all of us as we look at teachings and maybe we get caught in the, maybe we interpret them sort of in a philosophical way, or we kind of intellectualize and we try to figure out how, what they mean, is there an answer here somehow, somewhere? But the instruction that's given here is to actually just set that aside in terms of trying to figure out an answer, but actually just apply ourselves completely to the practice. So her study continues. As the book points out, there's a bit of illumination of the particular situation of how maybe a general type of way of teaching was happening at the time, 17th century China, which you may kind of understand that it may look a certain way. And the author points out that there's kind of almost like a manly type of resolve and determination that's, at least in how it's presented, it kind of has that flavor a little bit. Ultimately speaking, that's not what the teachings are pointing out, but I think they can be presented with a certain inflection to them. So the author brings that up, but then also brings up that the teacher is by no means oblivious to gender distinctions, some of these different concerns at the time, which is pretty interesting. So you have teachers who are very willing to take on women practitioners. So there's a very, quite open aspect to some opportunities in different ways for women practitioners. And she gains acceptance from her teacher at this point. And at age 33, she's able to leave home. And then at this point settles into a hermitage by nearby Mount Hang, which is close to her teacher as well. So she's able to study it in more depth there. She composes gathas, these are kind of, I don't know what you would describe them, sort of like Zen poems in a way. And the author points out here, these gathas certainly demonstrate her mastery of Chan texts, as well as a certain literary flair, if not originality, for which she is later quite well known. So Jizong writes in this poem, "The fragrant wind that blows in from the south, when will it end? The halls and pavilions are a bit chilly, only you yourself will know. In the fine weather, the butterflies flit about, following the scent. And at dawn, the roosters herald the sun as it rises from east to west. From this moment, I have penetrated the true meaning of things, and the myriad things of the underworld break into laughter." Say that right. Even the myriad things in the underworld break into laughter. So luckily we have these wonderful writings that have been preserved, and there's some obviously teachings that show up in different ways in a few of these different poems that I'll bring out, that I'll recite here. I'm not sure if there's too much to say about this first one. It's very kind of beautiful imagery. And at the end, she talks about having penetrated the true meaning of things. And I think that is a way of speaking to how the teachings can really help us understand what this world is in all its great variety. Obviously, we can very easily, through our thinking and conceptualization, we break things out, sort of that's how we intellectually make sense of everything, is everything is broken out. And then, we'll have different opinions and ideas about those different things. But here we have this nun who's saying, understanding the true meanings of things, which I think is a way to actually see through our ideas of this fragmented worldview of how we try to frame up the world of distinct objects. So she's saying that we can actually see this nature of how things show up as it truly is, as reality itself, not as we think it is, which is a fragmented this and that, all these different competing elements of life. So understanding the true meaning of things. And then she says, even the myriad beings of the underworld break into laughter. So I think you could probably read this in different ways, but for me, it's, I think, alluding to, well, some of the imagery in Buddhism of different figures like Mara in different elements have, they're kind of like an archetype of the challenges in life. And I think that's probably the same here. The underworld, beings of the underworld, if it's different states of mind, I don't know if this is quite making sense, but basically, even those challenges in our life, the so-called underworld beings, break into laughter. So even the things that are troublesome for us can be seen in a different light. We can actually see this in terms of liberation rather than being bound by whatever seems like it's hindering us. Actually, you hear this term, weeds of our practice, Suzuki brings up that that's kind of the nourishment of our practice. Actually, those things that are bad, the demons, so to speak, are only seen that way because of confusion. And she's flipping that upside down, basically. And then later it's mentioned here, or actually Jizang says, in a response, let me back up a little bit. Not too long after she becomes a nun and is at her hermitage, her teacher takes up a invitation to teach in North Hunan province, which it sounds like he was a little bit reluctant to do that. And she writes that I too wanted to leave the mountain to continue to study with my teacher. But before she was able to, the author says, however, she received word that Tangji had unexpectedly died. The lands used to grow crops in the mountains, in the mountainous areas of Hunan, had been ravaged by the warfare and turmoil of the last years of the Ming. And Tangji and his disciples were forced to live on wild greens, a meal which ultimately caused his illness and early demise. So at this point in Jizang's life, we see a new chapter begin. And as the author says here, thus began a new chapter in her life as a Buddhist nun, one that involved traveling many miles, meeting many people, and giving teachings in various convents and temples. Wuchang, an important city, even then located in eastern Hebei on the south bank of the Yangtze River, or was one of the places that she traveled. Her journey began inauspiciously. The place where she had taken lodging in Wuchang, and all of her personal belongings went up in flames, perhaps due to the fighting between the Manchu and Han forces, although that's not confirmed exactly. Her travels here were considerable, and as the author says, enough to warrant mention and admiration by her contemporaries. As one contemporary writes here, after the death of Master Tanji, with nothing but her walking staff, she sailed down River Jiang, crossed Lake Dongting, and fearlessly roamed among the Tiantai Mountains in the south and the Wutai Mountains in the north. And the author continues, Jizang's travels were not, of course, merely for the purpose of sightseeing, but rather an integral part in the tradition of Chan training. And at this point, her travels bring her to, let's see here, Mount King, Q-U-I-N-G, in Hangzhou. And there she met a teacher, actually a Dharma brother of her previous teacher, Tong Ji. And this new teacher, she began to study under this new teacher, Tong Wei, from which she ultimately received Dharma transmission, endorsement to teach. And she says she apparently made a real connection with the elderly monk. In her Yulu, her writings contain several accounts of interviews that she had with him. And let's see. Maybe I'll just skip ahead a little bit here because I want to get to more of her writing.
Jed, what is a Yulu?
Those are writings, apparently. I didn't know that term. Yeah, just so that would be kind of similar to the poem that I read before, kind of a Dharma teaching. Yeah, yeah. They call it a gatha in here, but I'm not sure. It's a little different than what I would consider that, but I don't know. Yeah, gotta find my spot in my notes. And at this point, she was invited to teach at a convent. So she's traveling and then also received a invitation to teach. Let me back up again. Mixed up my order here a little bit. Trying to keep the story straight. A lot of twists and turns. And got the number right. So she did want to return home at some point. So I'll back up before she was invited to invited to teach at a convent. She did want to return home, but this new teacher was recognizing her talents, basically. I think she wanted to return to her homeland and take up more of a solitary practice. So the author here, it says, after Jizang extended her visit in the southeast in other areas, She appears to have originally planned on returning to her homeland and resume a formal life of solitary contemplation. But her teacher had different plans, different suggestion. He says, when this old monk is gone, your work will be to liberate those who have missed the path. And Jizang says, then he presented me with the lineage records and fly whisk, which would be to teach at that particular place, I believe. She says she vigorously declined since she wanted to return home. But her master, this teacher, said it is best for you to remain here in the Jiangman area. And her teacher, Tong Wei, clearly regarded Jizang not only as a worthy Dharma heir, of which he only had 3, but also as someone whose qualifications as a religious leader would be wasted in the life of a solitary retreat. So again, just more examples here of how highly regarded she was as a teacher. And then, as I said before, she's invited to teach at the Wisdom Lamp convent. And she continued to write these yulu, these Dharma poems. And some of them were signed by prominent men of the time. Actually, the author says that one of them was signed by basically a who's list of literati from the time. And in those, some of those writings, I think they wrote prefaces and so forth that that were indicating that she was an eloquent and an effective and powerful teacher. So it's a lot of recognition of her ability to teach. And at her time at the Wisdom Lamp Convent, she held her nuns to a high standard, had a stern and solemn countenance, but never portrayed any type of hypocrisy. It was a reliable teacher for the practitioners there. And she did continue to travel as well. And I just continue to read some of these excerpts because they're so compelling in terms of this picture, kind of like I was saying before. Her story is such an embodiment of challenge and resilience. The author says, travel, whether in the form of short boat trips, mountain excursions, or long overland journeys, was a very central part of Jizang's experience and is reflected in much of her writings. From the time she left Hengshan and headed to the Jiangnan area, she was engaged in almost continuous travel of one kind or another. It was not always easy, for she was living in times of political chaos and bloodshed, which much of the South and certainly the Hunan area was plagued by bandits and famine, as well as scourges of battle that accompanied the protracted demise of the Ming dynasty. And she provided a hint of these difficulties, which may be read both as both literally and metaphorically in this following poem entitled "A Chant in Mid-Journey." So Jizang writes, looking ahead at rivers and plains, the roads of the world are circuitous, twisting and turning through the valleys among the ignorant and foolish, wind smelling of blood on wide slopes, as the foxes form into troops. And here I think the term foxes is meant to be the confused. Continuing, she says, the sun weak on the cold cliffs as the tigers are defeated in strategic points. So lonely and desolate it is naturally difficult to find a travel companion. Stretching on and on, who can understand? Few are those who feel the way. The gray heavens weep. On whom can I depend to accompany my way? Just the wooden staff that I carry with me through mountains and peaks. So certainly an image of what's going on in Jizong's world of warfare and her rather courageous travels through dangerous areas, including areas of bandits and so forth. The author says that travel could also be exhilarating. And we see that in a poem here. I'll read that as well. The road through rugged terrain, first proceeding, then halting. Momentarily, I note how worldly affairs are like rivers flowing east. Eyes reaching to the far corners of heaven, empty out past and present. Excuse me. Feet step along there among the clouds, going or staying as they please. Often I sit together with the master of the spring and of the boulders. And sometimes I travel together with the Taoist of the pine flower. And occasionally I come up with a phrase, as whistling, I ride the void. Better even than exchanging poems with the fisherman and woodcutter. So it's a mix of different experience that Jizong is experiencing as she is traveling, both the challenges, but then these other experiences, as she says here. I think she's kind of just describing sitting with nature, describes that in a couple different ways. And then these poems that are actually coming to her as she's whistling. She says she rides the void. This is a reference to emptiness, I believe. So I'm picturing this nun traveling through the mountains and, through her practice and her understanding, this is something that she's bringing to her travels. This kind of, as I talked about, as we navigate our time, whatever's happening in our world right now, if we can really fully embody this practice, then we're here, we're completely here. And I think that this is what the poem is pointing at. She's having enjoyable interactions with fishermen and woodcutters. And in the end of the chapter, it's got about, I'll pull 3 different teachings that she has and just talk about those a little bit. So these are further writings that she made and are preserved. And these are simply numbered. They're not titled. They're, at least this one is number 7, maybe in a compilation. I'm not sure if she gave it that number or not, but Jizong says, a jumble of boulders amid thousands of mountaintops, a thatched hut leaning precariously against the jade peaks. Yellow orioles sing in the kingfisher green willows. White egrets punctuate the sweet-smelling woodlands. The winding path cuts narrowly through the clouds. The bramblewood gate is deep among the fallen leaves. moving from one vantage point to another until all the mountain scenes have been captured in verse. So he starts out with a picture of the jumbled boulders amid the mountaintops and a thatched hut near the mountain peak. The next couple lines there were kind of caught my attention in a way that it seems like she's really blending different senses that are that she's describing. She says the yellow orioles sing in the kingfisher green willows. So a blending of color with sort of a scene. She calls kingfisher green. So she uses the bird name to describe the color of the willows. And then is kind of contrasting that with the yellow orioles. And then the next line, white egrets punctuate. So the vision of these egrets punctuates the smell of the woodlands. So I thought that was, I don't know, for me, a way of speaking to, what would you say, something that's different than the usual way that we experience things, where we're really honed in on maybe one sense at a time. We'll be kind of focusing on some particular sense here, but she's really blending vision with smell in a way that I think really almost loosens the boundaries that we really set up distinctly in our normal way of living life. So the poem is loosening our ideas, I think, in some sense, perhaps. The winding path cuts narrowly through the clouds, and the bramblewood gate is deep among the fallen leaves, perhaps as an allusion to the path, this path that she is taking, and that there's challenges here. It's a narrow path, maybe obscured in some ways by the bramblewood gate. And then ends it with moving from vantage point to vantage point until all the mountain scenes have been captured in verse, which I think in some ways really captures what poetry is for me, in that it doesn't necessarily capture something in a way, like a technical way, like you would find it in an encyclopedia, but the ability of poetry is just to be so engaged that nothing is ignored, or nothing is left outside of the experience of just reading the poem. So that's kind of what I see here. She says that she's moving from vantage point to vantage point, in all of which there's this kind of diligence of that nothing is left unseen at all. And that's what she's pouring into this verse, that we can actually, we can live our life in a similar way. We're pouring everything into, from all the different vantage points that have happened in our life, we can really dedicate ourselves completely to a point where nothing is left unseen. From the earlier quote there, that we can dedicate ourselves so fully to this that trying to remember the phrase that was used. That basically, everything is here. Everything is, we're here with everything. Nothing is dismissed. Nothing is missed. We burn our life completely. And then this next poem here, this I think particularly in terms of this connection maybe with our own situation a bit, the challenges that come up. She's talking about worldly life here. She says, on worldly roads, in wind and dust, I've grown old. Time to return home, wild greens to eat aplenty. If you are frugal, even in poverty, you will have enough. If you remain undetached, even disasters in the end are light. Learning comes from not despising the beginnings. Wisdom relies on the purity of being free of affairs. Let the bookish scholars and holders of high positions exert themselves to exhaustion for the rest of their lives. The lines that particularly came up for me, if you remain unattached, even disasters in the end are light. And that's a pretty strong statement to say, but certainly she was living through very difficult times. And I think perhaps what she's indicating here is if we can truly see the source of confusion, that happens in this human world, then the different things that come up will look much different than how we normally react to them. For her, it's the loss of loved ones, living in a time of warfare. If we can understand what grasping is, what leaning of mind is, what confusion is, then we can begin to understand what it means to remain or to have this freedom of unattachment be possible. And from there, disasters or different challenges are simply what are showing up in our life. And no matter how we judge them or kind of categorize them, the fact remains is that we simply need to take care of what's happening and do our best to try to help. She also says, learning comes from not despising beginnings. So maybe this is a commentary a little bit on, if we think of something bad beginning, something starting that is undesirable, that we catch ourselves if we are kind of despising different things. So we can learn that type of judgment is actually not helpful at all, whether despising or otherwise. And then she says, wisdom relies on the purity of being free of affairs. And again, this is another strong statement. And I think we can take her pretty seriously because she's living again in the time where she's being, she's under threat, basically. Her life is in danger as she's making her travel. So it's not like she can just be free from all the affairs that are happening in her life, but in a practical way. But here she's saying that wisdom is the purity of being free of affairs. And I think in that way, we can see this as the tumult of the different viewpoints that are arising in the human world. This is the world of affairs, essentially. And there's a great deal of confusion about these, that's what the different viewpoints are based on, confusions, because everybody's holding a different viewpoint, and to the degree that we're grasping strongly to them, that's the world of affairs. So these viewpoints can easily capture us, but we can, in essence, reverse that in just seeing what's happening, just clearly understanding how we'll be caught by this and that. And from that point of view, I think we can see, if we can understand where confusion is coming from by the grasping of views, then a whole different picture emerges. And from there, this exhaustion that can come up can change too. I think what Jizang is recommending here is that we simply dedicate to awareness, practice, dedicate to tending to our life as best that we can, and really staying here for whatever's happening, whatever is arising in our world, but remain steadfast in our practice. I wanted to leave a few minutes. We got a little more than 5 minutes in case anybody has any questions or comments. There's quite an adventure here as I was reading through this biography and the writings, but I think kind of inspiring for me in a lot of different ways, encouraging to see somebody living in a time where it's much more challenging for a woman to really take up this practice. Many other challenges for everybody in that particular situation of the fall of the Ming Dynasty. But yeah, if you have anything at all, any questions, or if you have any feelings about our current situation too, don't want to belabor that too much, but I thought I'd open that up in case anybody wanted to express anything there. Okay, yeah, Cindy, go ahead.
Yeah, Jed, thanks. You said this one line at least twice, maybe 3 times. That just really struck me. I wondered if you would could repeat it. It might be hard for you to find it in your talk, but it started something about wisdom comes from, and then something about affairs. Is that familiar to you, that you could repeat that again?
Yeah, that was from that last poem. It was, wisdom relies on the purity of being free of affairs.
Okay.
So, yeah, just to elaborate a little further on that, I guess, that really is what the human situation is. We find ourselves amidst kind of a continual flow, or maybe even torrent of human affairs. And that's really what the Buddha was pointing at. You can see it in the 83 problems kind of teaching, or essentially we have our lives that are full of a lot of different things. And we have a choice, basically, or we're presented with a question of how to solve our predicament. Whatever the affair might be, the affairs of the world. And the usual way that we would normally do that is to identify the problem. And then I think it's just almost like a automatic thing that we do. We have this kind of feeling that if I can control or change, and we probably don't even think of this consciously, but it's just such an automatic thing, that if somehow we can move this in, change this in away, then I'll have something that's different and better. Which we certainly have many things in our life which we need to like practically take care of. There might be political situations where we need to act and try to do our best to try to, negotiate different things, discuss different options with different people. So these worldly affairs, they need to be taken care of using our kind of usual method of negotiating and so forth. But Buddhism really is completely unique in the sense that it's directing our attention towards, as it says here, wisdom relies on knowing what's actually happening in our life. And we talked about this a little bit at practice period. Kristen had a nice talk where a lot of what she was talking about was basically directing attention back to what is happening for ourselves personally, or just what's happening in our heart and mind. So being free of affairs, as I was saying before, is kind of a strong statement, but I think she's saying it strongly in the sense that if we can truly understand what the Buddha pointed out about how craving comes up, and we shouldn't be surprised at all about how tumultuous things will get if craving and aversion just continues to be sort of the norm. So wisdom relies on understanding truly, to be free from affairs, or to actually understand the source of these problems and to know what to do about it. So I don't know if that quite got to what you're thinking there, Cindy, or not, but that line stuck out to me as well.
Yeah, great. Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you, Jed.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's a great book. There's a lot of very compelling stories in here, inspiring stories, and great teachings. There's, I think, part of me that is really encouraged. I think a lot of these names are really known too widely, but it really is a reminder for me of all the practitioners, just very sincere practitioners throughout time who have helped or dedicated themselves fully to this teaching. And I'm appreciative because in a complete way, it would not be here for us if it wasn't for these people who bravely went forth and carried the torch, so to speak, for us. So yeah, if there's no more questions, thanks. Good to see you.